P&R with Adam R. Welcome to 3P&R. I'm your host, Adam R. And with me on this episode is Jared Bradley. Jared, how you doing, sir?
Doing fantastic, man. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being on. I'm glad to have your time. Let's begin by just discussing what got you to where you are currently.
Well, you have to be a little more specific about that, man. So,
all right. So let me start by saying the VAC. That's got my full attention.
Okay. So M-Vac Systems is a DNA collection system. And the weird thing is it started out as collecting for bacteria like E. coli and salmonella and stuff like that. And then ran into a college buddy who was a FBI agent for a long time. And I was describing it to him. And he was like, man, that would have been amazing on some of my crime scenes. So we took it down to a private lab in Salt Lake City and had them test it for us. And the quote was, they said, you should be doing backflips off this table. This thing is so good. And so that's kind of how we got started in forensics. And we've been helping investigators solve crime ever since.
Yeah, that product sounds amazing, by the way. The more I read about it. So, I'm making a habit to really try not to get to know too much about the guests before meeting them. I like it to be like, I ran into, we had coffee. But that thing's got my attention. Is that not, how wide is that being used?
It's kind of hard to say, honestly. I mean, nationwide, in the U.S. at least, we've got, 175 units out there, something like that. But it's kind of deceiving because a number of those units are with agencies or with private crime labs that do a lot of work for agencies that don't have a system. And so it's kind of almost like a share, they'll share the technology. So there's a lot of agencies that have worked cases, and that's got to be in the thousands. But and especially, a lot of that we base on the number of consumables that are being ordered, and those are flying out the door. So we've, as far as how widely it's being used, it's hard to say.
Yeah, I would think it'd be more widely used, right? Because it sounds perfect. I mean, the success rate for that, for collecting DNA, is pretty high.
Well, actually, it's not.
It's not.
You'd be really surprised. DNA is a complicated thing. It's because all of us are sloughing off so much DNA that picking up DNA in general that's easy. You can almost like swipe your fingers over the top of the table and you've picked up somebody's DNA. But getting usable DNA, especially for criminal purposes, that's actually a lot more difficult than what it sounds.
Right. What would be the process with this machine?
So the M-Vac itself works just like a carpet cleaner. So it sprays a sterile solution down and then vacuums up the DNA. And if you were to compare it to like literally a carpet cleaner versus a broom, you have a stain on your floor, and especially the more porous it is, like carpet versus a hardwood floor, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get out. So a broom in a carpet, you got like red wine spilled in a carpet, for example, a broom just isn't going to be appropriate for that. So if you want to really get at it, you got to break out the carpet cleaner. And that's literally how the M-Vac works. So again, it sprays that sterile solution down and vacuums at the same time. So it creates like this little mini hurricane down on the surface.
Right.
And as it's collecting, another advantage of it is it's constantly spraying new solution down. So you can cover a larger surface area. You can get deep into the surface if you need to. And it just collects a lot more. Even the FBI showed that it collects multitudes more than the swabbing or even the cutting techniques.
Right. And for equipment like that, it's got to be proven, obviously, because it's got to have a chain of custody, and it goes down, if whatever goes to court, someone's got to be able to speak to it. Mm-hmm. The world of forensics it's very mysterious to me, right? I would love to learn more about it. I speak to a lot of detectives, I hear their routines. It's brutal. You know, like people don't really understand how much cops go through. They go through a lot. It's not to show up to the crime scene and sit down and have a discussion and put these, connect the dots. It's very thorough in comparison to what it was long ago.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And especially since about the mid 90s, technology has gone up. You see the proverbial hockey stick, and all of technology has done that, including especially in DNA. And so, the detective that used to be able to just go onto the crime scene and for the most part his job would be, or her job would be to question people around. But nowadays, boy, they have to know a ton more. And even the responding officers have to know that if they walk into a crime scene, they can contaminate it with their DNA.
Right.
And so they have to be educated on a lot of things that they didn't have to. So, or they didn't used to have to. So it's solving cases nowadays is a lot more complicated and difficult. And again, a lot of it is just because the technology is so good and so advanced. And also because juries expect it. There's something called a CSI effect, where there will be juries even in a murder case, and they just expect a DNA profile, fingerprinting. They expect some kind of physical evidence, and a confession even isn't good enough anymore.
Yeah, how much is that from TV? Like TV really set the bar high for jury, right?
Yeah, this, and like I said, it's called the CSI effect, where these TV shows have given these unrealistic expectations from, they got 43 minutes of airtime. And so in that 43 minutes, they have to show the crime, how it's responded to, how they get the evidence, and then they solve it, and then they got to catch the bad guy. Well, that's just not realistic. And anybody that has, an adult time frame understands that. But there's a lot of people on the juries that they'll look at things and they'll say, well, this guy's been, this crime has taken 2 years to solve. And so that's unrealistic. And therefore this guy must be innocent. They're just framing him. It took them that long to, I don't know. There's just all these weird notations out there that, and TV has really, but that's what TV does, is it gives us an escape, and that's kind of how they have to do it. They're not going to string out one murder per season. They got to do it, one murder per show. And so that's just kind of the way TV works nowadays. But unfortunately, it's given some unrealistic expectations to some people.
Yeah, I would say. How many times I have a hard time watching TV crime shows, because when I see these guys, they get something off the ground, they get their phone and they plug it in, and then, boom, they got some results. Or a guy in a van's, I don't know what he's doing in there, but he has results. And I'm thinking to myself, how? If that were the case, there wouldn't be crime. It would be impossible.
Right. It would be like the Minority Report,
Yeah, exactly.
We'd solve cases before they even happen.
That's a scary movie. that's a scary.
It really is.
I remember watching that and thinking to myself, that's because what if they get it wrong? What if a guy just had a bad day and they misunderstood that? Scary business.
Yeah. The whole concept of trying to solve things before they even get, and frankly, there's some criminal profilers that are starting to think that they can do that. They can judge people based on past behaviors on what they're going to do in the future. And I just kind of look at them. I'm like, gotta be careful with that, man.
It's really hard because of the human psyche. That's, there's people out there that they legitimately split in two different people. I spoke with a homicide detective, and he was talking about a serial killer they had in custody, and he was like lending a hand to the case or whatever. And he was just like a regular guy, shooting the shit with him. And then eventually they figure out it's him. They have him in a room, and they start discussing a female who got away, and his whole personality and his disposition just altered completely. He went to predator mode instantly. But that just lets you know people wear a lot of faces, and it's really hard to, I don't think you can just go profile somebody, maybe a roundabout, but people like that scare me. They could transform who they are in a wink of an eye.
Yeah. Those kind of guys are actually pretty rare, but I've interviewed a number of, even there's a specialist, his name's Lee Meller, and boy, you want to have an interesting interview. Dr. Lee Meller is a criminal profiler he specializes in serial killings and serial rapists. And this guy, he gets into the psyche really deep.
I wonder how that affects him. Yeah.
Boy, talking to him, he describes two different things. One is what he calls the sewer, which is kind of like the blood and guts and the drugs and all the garbage that happens. And it's kind of a sewer that's floating along. And he says, and then vertically, there's an abyss. And the abyss is kind of the why. And the abyss goes deep. And so just imagine an endless chasm that goes down. And the deeper you get into it, you start getting into psyches of these serial killer types. And it's just fascinating listening to him. I mean, it's his job literally to figure out what kind of a person would commit a certain type of a crime. And I'm like, wow,
I would like to talk to that guy.
Scary stuff.
I would definitely like to talk to him because that, I guess, I don't know, is it ignorance? Until speaking to before I even looked into serial killers, because everyone kind of knew what it was. I had invited Cloyd Steiger on, and, he was involved with some serial killers. And so prior to him coming on, I kind of, did some fact checking and figure out I was shocked at the number of active serial killers. I couldn't believe it. I guess maybe because I just expected it to be on the news all the time, but it's not, because some of them are not crazy amounts of bodies, but the point is it happens, and it's happening more often than I thought. So now with this new machine that you have, I mean, granted, technology's got to advance as it should, but I wonder if that puts the hold on some of these guys, because they're aware, like, technology is growing. They have to know that getting away with it is much harder.
It's interesting. I've talked to Cloyd and a number of others about exactly that. And, it's possible, because a lot of these guys that used to get away with things back in the 70s, as long as they didn't leave their fingerprints somewhere, or somebody actually saw them do it, then a lot of times they could get away with it. But nowadays, man, I mean, your cell phone, it will give away your position, your fingerprints, your DNA, your facial recognition. They can spot your car. There's so many things that will give you away now, and we voluntarily allow ourselves to be tracked in so many different ways that you would have to be really, really good to get away with multiple crimes.
Yeah, you'd have to you'd have to be a real life Dexter.
Yeah. And it's I mean, personally, just knowing what I know, if most people would just apply the same amount of brain power and effort into a career, they'd be millionaires.
Oh, in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat.
Yeah. So, and my system, if you leave DNA somewhere and there's any kind of clue as to, you give somebody like Cloyd just even a slight hint as to where to apply our machine, and you've left even less than 10 skin cells there, we'll get you.
Wow. That's pretty, yeah. As a kid, that was a movie. And now here you have something that's applying that, right? So
yeah, it's almost Gattaca level, where it's not as instantaneous as what they show on the show, but it's reaching that level. And we're developing new ways of getting DNA off of shell casings. So some of these drive-by shootings are starting to get solved. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. the average person sloughs off 400,000 cells a day.
Wow.
So if you figure we need 10 of those in order to actually develop a good profile, that's a full profile that's uploadable into the CODIS or the national database. We only need 10 of those. So, if you touch a surface or you accidentally, touch your face and then you touch a Coke can or even leaving DNA on the victim, we can find it. And so, yeah, crime isn't, at least major crime like that, where an agency is going to really apply enough resources to catch you. Yeah, then I think the number of cases that are going to go unsolved are going to get fewer and fewer as we go along here.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, especially in current times with these people. I talk about it a lot, but I hate hearing this defund the police. Come on, stop it. You remove police from the element and then you have the neighbors trying to sort problems out between one another. It's going to end up in bloodshed. There is no, especially when ego's involved, right? Cool heads never prevail.
It is not a good practice. And well, you heard just in this week, the two of those congresswomen that were carjacked, in Philadelphia, and I think it was Chicago. And that's all primarily from defunding the police. It's not so much that you're just taking the number of police officers off the street. Is even if you refund it, you've still lost a lot of expertise,
right?
And
a network.
I have a military background, and if you look at wars historically, that's really what happens. And one of the reasons that the first year or two we got our butts kicked in Korea is because right after World War II, so many of the veterans left the service, and so all that expertise that we gathered through World War II, we lost all that. Well, then come Korea, which was only 7, 10, 8 years later, we didn't have the expertise of how to conduct a war. And so, it was ugly. And that's the same thing is happening with law enforcement. And so, when they defund, like NYPD, for example, cut $1 billion out of their budget.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And a quarter of their budget. And you can't do that. The number of amazing cops that have 15, 20 years of experience that either retired or left, and took all their expertise, all of their CIs, all of their contacts, all of the relationships that they had. They took all that with them.
Yeah, you're talking about well sharpened experience, right? An instinct that you have to develop over time. That's crazy to say defund. So I mean, I literally, not that I had an argument with this person, I won't call it an argument. We were talking about, because where my brother lives, there's people robbing stores. And the owners are doing nothing. There's no cop to stop them. So they just let it happen. And so this guy was like, well, we could deal with it. I'm like, you're going to deal with it. You're going to go up to Oregon and guard a place for a week? I said, it's not going to, right when you leave, it'll start again. And then his cross argument was, well, I'll get myself and my friends will stay there. I'm like, buddy, you realize what you're saying, right? You're going to be there 24/7, 7 days a week, the rest of your life. What about your family? And how are you going to pay your friends?
Right.
I don't think people understand that it takes structure to have law enforcement. Law enforcement is a structure. And the biggest problem with that is, and people aren't aware of this, they're saying, well, the cop, there's bad people in every profession. All of them. People are just bad in general. There's the exception every other time. It's not like you're going to solve it by removing cops. In fact, you're giving opportunists and troublemakers the green light to go do whatever it is they please. And that's the unfortunate part.
Yeah. And I think you nailed it with the word opportunist. I don't know what the stat is nowadays, but there's a huge percentage of all crime and all the way from burglary all the way to murder, where these are crimes of opportunity. And most people don't wake up in the morning and think, you know what, I'm just going to go rob a bank today. That just doesn't happen. You know, it's one of those where even if they're in a store, and I'll bet there were people that were just walking around or saw something on social media and they said, you know, somebody was saying, hey, we're going to go hit Louis Vuitton today. And they were like, you know, I hadn't thought about that, but I could use a purse.
Yeah. And like, who's going to, and in their mind, who's going to stop us?
Right. And they had heard that anything up to $950, they don't even arrest you. So why not? I mean, it's crazy. You have people walking into stores and they're using either a calculator or their phone or something. They're adding up how much money they can, or how much, you know, each piece of clothing can cost.
That's crazy. When you have criminals out there being, they're actually, that's crazy. That's crazy to hear. They're sitting there being intelligent about it.
They're adding it up and they're like, okay, we're at 920. Let's just take this and we'll go.
Oh man. I don't know. There's a few things in the world that we know, and people, the majority, not all people, but some people need fear to keep them back from doing what their primal instinct wants to do. Right. Because consider that, like, most people don't do horrible things in fear of God. I'll go to hell if I do it. And that stops them. And I said this to some of the paranormal people I talked to. Man, he told the world God didn't exist, chaos would ensue right after. Guys would be like, what? Yeah. So you tell me I could kill my wife? You know, I mean, like, you have to have repercussions. And if you don't have a structure like law enforcement and government, listen, people, if you think you're going to make this world a quote unquote better place, get ready for the stress the government and these other agencies deal with. It's not as easy as like, well, you know, we'll just feed these. You have to have structure. It's stressful. It's really stressful. It's not. I try to organize just my home. And I get stressed out by all the bills, and then I got to get the groceries, and you know, I got to do the grass today. Like, these are, so now scale it up 4,000 times. You're talking about a whole nation, and on top of which you got to protect us. I don't know. Yeah, man. It's crazy.
Well, if I actually on my podcast, I was I just threw some thoughts together, and I was like, you know what? If you think about how quickly society broke down when we thought we were going to run out of toilet paper.
Oh, yeah.
You know, back in the spring of 2020, which really wasn't that long ago, literally there were people fist fighting over rolls of toilet paper.
Yeah.
And, you know, and every Christmas you see people, they're arguing over some toy. And, you know, that's, if there's not people that are actually assigned and given the authority to protect what, you know, enforce the law and do what cops and sheriff's deputies do, then a lot of people will lose it. And again, it's one of those targets of opportunity where they see something, they're like, you know what, there's no repercussion for me to just take this. It's something I want, so I'm just going to take it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's
the moral compass is definitely in question in times like that.
And, yeah. Well, and I said, if you play it out, it is the Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, actually, you're right. You're right.
And yeah, talk about a movie that, I don't know about you, but when I first saw that movie, that scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, it was a disturbing movie. It really put a shining light on the human nature. And because again, we're just primal animals. We just happen to be smart enough to make tools. You know, that's what separates us from most, that we're smart enough.
Yeah.
And we also have and again, and I say this to some of the other people I speak to, but we look to stars and we're like, what's up there? There must be a God. God's a factor. And if you do the wrong thing, you're going to hell. How many people don't do awful things daily because the God factor, you know? Now, how many people don't believe in God at all and they have an evil core? What stops them? That's law enforcement. Yeah. You know, cops walk into fire. You know what I mean? Like I said this to a lot of cops I speak to. They're literally dealing with things that the rest of us don't want to, but they do it, and they do it willingly. I've never heard of a cop say, well, I'm going to be a cop today. What do you want to do? I don't know. I guess I'll just drive around with my badge. They're out there with the best intentions. Now, did some other cops do some bad stuff? Sure. But then on the same note, I said this before, a nurse was killing patients because she wanted to. There has been some, I mean, athletes forget it. I won't even touch that. There's an athlete. It was on I think it was Netflix. This guy killed someone and then continued playing football. But no, like it didn't happen, you know? So when they're saying that there's these cops that did whatever they did, sure, they did something bad. But that's just the handful. There are bad people in every scenario. And like we've been saying, I say this a lot. I try to imagine just where I live with no law enforcement. That's a scary thought. Because when you say the word defund the police, let's imagine there's a place called the Hall of Evil, right, where they all gather and have meetings. I'm sure they're like, wait, did they just say they're defunding the police? We're definitely gonna go protest on their behalf, and then hey, it's easy picking. So,
yeah, and especially in today's society, I mean, there's so many of us now. There's 330 million people in the United States.
Yeah, it's a crazy number.
And there's only 700,000 cops. So if you look at the ratio alone,
grossly outnumbered.
That's a scary ratio. And then you start defunding them, and so you're going to get less than 700,000, and then you start tying their hands with different policies, and these guys are already at a disadvantage. I mean, the one thing the advantages that cops have is, number one, they have the law on their side. They've been hired and trained to do something specific, and that's what society, we always have law enforcement. Since the beginning of time, we've had some kind of law enforcement, whether it's a tribal chief or the sheriff of Tombstone or whatever, but somebody that could enforce the law and, deal out justice as they see fit and as the rules are established in society. That has to exist. We can't, that example you had of, the guy that wants to go protect the store, and you're like, are you going to, at some junction, you're going to run out of time and
well, yeah, you gotta pay for your bills and then your friends' bills. Like, and I had to explain to him, like, so you think you and the rest of the Southern Justice League are going to park out there for what, years? You have families and your own priorities. It's an asinine thing. Then when we're discussing that, we're discussing one town. I had to express, and when I gave him the bigger picture, I'm like, think about the whole country now. You can't be everywhere. That's why there's this amazing network called law enforcement. In Roman times, if there were no guards and there was no legion, do you think Rome would have lasted even one decade? It would have been done long ago, long before. It's needed. So I don't know.
And it's really bizarre that anybody that thinks that society can last even a week without any law enforcement. I mean, it's if they announced tonight that starting at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, there will be no cops.
Oh, the purge in a heartbeat.
Yeah. You may as well start boarding up and you're done. As a business owner, personally, and I've thought about this. It's like, could I actually function, even as a business that works with law enforcement? Could I function even a couple of days without knowing that the streets are relatively safe, without knowing that my business, my inventory, my computers, the building itself, everything that's in there, could that survive very long if people knew that there was no cops, there was nobody that was going to enforce it? The odds of the business owner actually being in there for 24/7, you can't do it. No,
the numbers are way against you. The numbers are against law enforcement now. And in that scenario, that's Mad Max world, man. I mean, that's a scary world, like it's important. I don't know how they're going to do this. I mean, but the community should want to get to know their law enforcement. Like, there's not everyone's a small area or not. They're like Brett Preston. He's a sergeant with the town of Sneed's police department. You could tell he cares. He's got it's a small apartment. There's like 6 guys, but that's a bond. It's a brotherhood, and they're involved with the community. And that's probably more important than anything else, is that they have that relationship. And it's harder for bigger cities. I get that. You're talking about people compressed in a small area, But at some point, and this isn't just law enforcement's responsibility, the leaders of these neighborhoods, because every neighborhood has that person they look to, they should be the ones making these functions. Make a block party, invite law enforcement, have a meet and greet, have some positive relationships. It's the people are responsible, not just law enforcement. You can't put it on law enforcement. You know, they deal with plenty already. The people got to do it. We got to do it. We got to make that arrangement. We have to, because if
100%.
We continue this pattern, we're heading towards Mad Max. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, which is, it's crazy. But, you know, society, especially the United States, was never set up to be solely, the laws were never set up, and society as a whole was never set up to be only enforced by a select few. It was, and that's why, you know, you hear all the way the Minutemen. Yeah. You know, even the defense of the country was everybody's responsibility. And law enforcement is the same way. Now, you know, that's not vigilantism. That's totally different. What we're talking about is, you know, looking after your neighbor's house. You know, when I go out of town, and I'm sure everybody listening to this does the same thing. When you're heading out of town, you're going out on vacation, you probably text all your neighbors and you say, hey, I'm going to be out of town. Could you look over my house? You know, it's not the cop's job to watch your house while you're gone.
Right.
It's, you know, while you're physically there, that's your job. But when you're leaving, most likely you're going to have somebody watching over the house. And that's just how we function. That's what society is all about. And that's what being a good neighbor and being just a part of a community is all about. Right. You look after each other.
And that's a key word, community, right? Because the police are part of that community. You know, I've heard someone say, well, I get judged every time I go out. Well, have you waved or made yourself known? Like, you know, anything. And then when they do stop you, instead of getting friggin' aggravated, and speak. I'm not telling people, if you're in a situation and you're pulled over and you feel it's a negative encounter, yeah, sure, record. Protect yourself by all means. But don't be that jerk that I see on YouTube running up to the cops or police stations with your camera. You're insane. You're provoking problems. You're a problem maker. And 9 out of 10 of these people, they're not lawyers. These are jabroni people that want to feel important. And it's foolish. It's a stupid thing to do. By all means, protect yourself, but don't go looking for problems. That's the police already have stress.
Yeah, if you think so. There was a stat that I heard from, I don't know, one of my other guests on my podcast, but that they said that it's somewhere around 300 to 600 times more stressful to be a cop than the average job anywhere else.
Yeah, I would say.
And the weird thing is, you know, like so some jurisdictions, some politicians, they crack me up. They're like, we're not going to allow our police force to do car stops anymore. What? And
what?
It's just insane. But
do you realize that the reason they caught Ted Bundy's for a traffic stop?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What?
And man. Yeah, the list goes on. And can you just? I mean, even trying to fathom that is almost
you're
impossible.
giving people a license to be speed demons or careless drivers, or I mean, I don't understand, man. It's real.
So basically, you know, you rob a store or you rob a bank, and if you can get into your car, you're good. They can't stop you.
This isn't conveying a great message, man.
I mean, if you play that out, it's just insane. But you know, the police initially, they're like, that's awesome, because car stops are actually one of the most dangerous things that police do. And you know, if you ever wonder why police will walk up and they'll have their hand on the hilt of their service revolver, or they'll walk up on the passenger side, or they'll stop right before the back seat, it's because they're assessing the situation. It's like you're sitting in your car and you're just late for work, and you're just like, man, this guy caught me speeding. And by the way, the chance of a cop pulling you over when you haven't done anything is pretty much zero. Right. I mean, the only reason most people are pissed when they get pulled over is because they got caught. They got caught breaking the law, and they know they got caught breaking the law. And so they're just as mad at themselves as they are at the cop. But it's not the cop's fault. You were breaking the law. And most of us just aren't mature enough to admit it. I mean, frankly, but the bottom line is the cop does not know that you are just irritating because you didn't get to work. As far as he knows, you might be a serial killer. You've already, you've committed another murder, and you have nothing to lose to pop off on this cop, and the sentence is going to be the same whether you kill one person or two. He doesn't know that, or she, and so it got to be politically correct, right?
Right. Yeah. Everything today, you say the wrong thing today, and you're getting crucified. Right.
So anyway, but it's so dangerous, and there's again, that expertise. When they defund the police, to go back to one of the first things we talked about. When you defund the police, you lose a lot of that expertise on actually how to approach a car. So now you got these rookies that are coming up. They're a few months out of the academy, and they're approaching this car, and maybe they miss it. Maybe they miss some guy that's in the back seat that's got, he's leveling a shotgun on him, and
listen, I've seen a lot of these videos where the cop walks up and he gets shot at or gets shot. That's frightening. Mm-hmm. And, they should take precautions. People are dangerous. I talk to paranormal investigators, and across the board, the same message. I'm like, well, what's the most frightening thing you're coming across when you're out there? And it's people. It's the most frightening part of their investigation. It's because people are dangerous. So listen, if you're a baker in you're in a city, you're a baker, and there's a mass shooting down the road, are people calling you? No, they're calling law enforcement. It's an asinine thing to think that we need to get rid of them. We need to defund them. No, here's the answer. People should say this. They should increase their funds. Give the cops raises. They should. When I found out what cops get paid, I was like, what? They're literally walking into fire consistently. And when I say fire, not just some killer or a gunfight, try getting involved with a domestic issue.
Oh man, those are so dangerous.
Yeah, I mean,
people. Yeah,
and not even the fact of what could happen. You have to actually sit there and listen to that shit. So give them increase their wages, give them a rate, increase their salary, and give them adequate training like jiu-jitsu or some kind of hold. Where they can hold someone down. They're not going to do permanent damage. There's legitimate ways you can hold someone just by a wrist maneuver. And they can't do nothing, and you're not jeopardizing their life. So if people want to argue, don't go to Capitol Hill and be like, defund them. In fact, increase their money, give incentive. That's a job worth having. It's a noble job, and now they're getting paid better, as they really should be. Because again, I try to think of cops that go to that have to work in South Side Chicago. It's a friggin' war zone. And they're getting paid what? Of course they're frustrated, man. People are dangerous and they're out of their minds. So I don't think the answer is defund. I think it's increase funds and increase education. Absolutely.
Well, and it's not just their pay. It's everything about, if you paid surgeons what you pay cops, imagine what kind of people would be operating on you.
Oh, forget it.
Yeah, nobody would ever go to the hospital.
Yeah,
but it's not just their pay. And don't get me wrong, I've talked to a lot of cops and I've got people that live in my neighborhood that are cops that, my kids hang with their kid and go to school with their kids, and they're good people. They mow their lawn just like I do.
Right.
And they're good people, and they do it because they've always wanted to do it. And Cloyd Steiger was the same way. If you ever ask him, and I did on one of my episodes, but I said, Cloyd, how did you end up being a cop? And when he was 10 years old, he saw a cop on TV, and he's like, that's what I want to do. Yeah. And so he did the research. He figured out how to do it. He applied for the academy, and he got accepted, and he's, he had a fantastic career. But the training is one of the things when you defund the police, the training is the first thing that goes.
Yep.
And because there's a certain number of bodies that they have to have in uniform out there in order to cover the territory that they have to cover. Well, when you defund the police, their ability to cover all the shifts and still send people to de-escalation training and still send people to crime scene investigation training and still send people to detective school. Those are the kind of things that suffer the most. And when people fall out of training, maybe they had the latest and greatest escalation or de-escalation training that they were lined up for. The budget got slashed, and so they said, well, no more schools. And so, yeah, maybe that would have been exactly what could have, like, for example, that the cop that was convicted today, that was a huge case where, she pulled her service weapon instead of her taser. And now she's been convicted of manslaughter because of that. Well, maybe if she had time to go to another training and, who knows? Maybe that could have happened, but
yeah, you have military background, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in military, your training is thorough, so it becomes memory muscle and instinct to know things. So if you again increase funds, give them adequate training, it'll become memory muscle. I don't care who you are. If you're in a situation where you feel your life's on the line, yeah, weapons coming out. And it's going to be instinct. It's going to be your primal instinct. You're still a living thing. Beside being a cop, you're a living, breathing animal who wants to live. And in a moment of pressure, you're going to react to instinct. And if you're not trained adequately, the instinct's going to, it might blow up in your face. You grab the wrong thing, for an example. You can't blame the human element. But
no, and I'll bet you money that's exactly what happened. My understanding is they were like in a big wrestling match.
Right.
And, so she's fighting with this young, healthy guy, and she must have been losing because she reached for something.
Right.
Well, I'll bet you 95% of all of especially in the academy, I bet 95% of their training when it comes to weapons is pulling their service revolvers. So that's where that muscle memory was. Well, I bet in her mind, she was like, I got to get my taser out so I can slow this guy down. He's kicking my butt.
Right.
But muscle memory reached for her revolver and bam, or whatever it was. And
well, in her mind, she's fighting for her life. This isn't like she's sitting around on the corner, stumped over, like, I'll make a choice today. It's an instinct. And, it's I don't know. First and foremost, if you have an interaction with cops, I don't care what it is, they're police, just surrender, period.
Just do what they say.
And if they're wrong, guess what? There's these other guys out there, these other sharks called lawyers, and they love picking things apart. Like right now, where I live in Tampa, if you had a problem, I'm pretty sure a lawyer would fall out of a tree. It's not like they're everywhere. So just surrender. Even if the cop is 1,000% wrong, surrender. Let a lawyer figure that out. Let witnesses get involved. But when you put up fights or you put up arguments, you're still dealing with a human element. And how much abuse can anyone take from somebody? It's impossible.
Yeah. Well, and something else that I don't think most people know is that when, like, say somebody dials 911 and the cop from that point forward has to respond. He has to. It's the law. Well, they have to take control of the situation. And so they're trained to escalate along with the situation. So if people are being belligerent or threatening, well, then the cop has to respond to that. And that's how things escalate. And so if it starts with us, I don't wear a badge. And so if I get pulled over and as the cop is approaching my car, I open the door and I jump out and I look at him and I start yelling at him. Well, I've just escalated the situation and it's ugly now.
Yeah.
because immediately he has to respond to that. But who escalated it first? Me.
Listen,
And I'll bet you if you look at all of the different situations, all of the interactions, the millions of interactions between law enforcement and citizens every day, the vast, vast majority of them are going to be escalated by the citizen.
yeah. I'll tell you what. Let's remove the cop from that scenario. You're in a car, you pull up, you're walking up to a car and some guy jumps out and starts screaming at you. It's not going to be a positive experience. You're not going to, you know what I mean? It's going to be probably even more negative because the repercussions of you getting in a fist fight are minimal when there's just two regular people. There's a repercussion when you're fighting with a cop. And so I think people hop out of their car and freak out on cops. Look, I don't mean to say it, but you're an asshole to begin with. What are you doing? Stop it.
Well, yeah. And you're stupid. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Because
you don't go to court and tell a judge how to do his job, right? Like, listen, Your Honor, you're absolutely wrong. Like, why are you in court in the first place? What put you there? A lot of,
right.
Denzel Washington says this, it starts in the home. And when I say that, I agree with him because it comes with the respect that you give to your parents, right? Like for me, from my parents, I've had negative interactions with cops in my youth because I was a punk. I hung around with punks, but I never disrespected them because I was raised to respect your elders, period. Mm-hmm. And even saying that, my negative interactions with a cop, it was Pinellas County, Florida. If I look back at that in hindsight, he was literally just trying to steer me away from problems. You know what I mean? I could then as a kid and hanging around punks and trying to show your friends how cool you are, one thing. But when you look back, you're like, wow, he legitimately was just trying to push someone from a problem. He's trying, and even the way he spoke to me, I look back at it now, I'm like, this guy meant well. I just took it a different way because I was trying to show off to these cronies I was hanging out with, and that's not a good approach. So but I never disrespected. I never spoke back to him. You just can't because my mom and dad raised me to be respectful of your elders, and that's the way it should be. And if if that interaction's so negative where you're being wrongfully arrested, listen, at some point you have to get a lawyer and let him sort that out because you're this could be said again, remove the cop from this scenario. When two people are having a disagreement in a home, a third party is usually necessary to get the point across because you're not going to hear one another. You're so hell bent on one another's point. It's crazy. It's why politicians will get along, right? Most politicians agree on the same stuff. They just, because they're on separate sides, it's a fight regardless. They're not going to win it. So I don't know, man. I think we really need to rebuild relationships. And again, I asked the communities to do this. Set up functions. Have like a little block party in your neighborhood, or have a function where there's a gathering and invite the police and get them involved. Because at the end of the day,
they would love that. All the cops that I know, they would respond to that just in a heartbeat.
You should do it. It should be done.
They are part of the community, but in today's environment, a lot of them, they won't actually show up as. I mean, I'm sure they would if they were invited, and invited as law enforcement,
right?
But most of them are really hesitant to even be on social media and actually have their real name. Like I said, those guys that are in my neighborhood, a lot of them are on like Facebook or something, but they don't use their real names because back when all the rioting was happening after the George Floyd incident, they were being doxxed. I mean, their families were being threatened just because they are cops. And to me, that's like, how did we get so far?
Meanwhile, all those mean-spirited people on social media that's bashing these cops, when their house gets robbed, who are they calling? The butcher? Right. Hey, John, someone robbed my house, and you know what John's going to say? He's like, why the hell would I care? What am I going to do?
Right.
So, yeah, there's another side to that, too. Have meet and greets in the neighborhood. Have an organizer from the community, organize this thing, invite law enforcement. They get to know everyone. And here's the other part of that, too. That kind of communication, when there's an incident in your neighborhood, the cops, their ability to minimize the problem is fast. They could rule out quicker. I know who that is. I know who that is. And they could even ask you, well, hey, what happened? If someone robs your house, it'll make law enforcement's job easy. Everyone knows everyone. the vigilance of a neighborhood watch, how once upon a time would be. I mean, maybe I'm thinking in fantasy, but I think that would be a great world. And it really comes down, again, the people have to do it. In Southside Chicago, where all this chaos is, those people are prisoners in their homes, right? You want to solve that. The community leaders need to get involved. The cops are not psychic, man. They're only there. And in that scenario, the best they could do is respond and help the best they can. But community leaders got to step up, and they got to get involved with law enforcement and have these meet and greets. It'll help them rule out the problems from the non-problems.
Yeah. And when you know the cops that are patrolling your neighborhood, I think personally, even if I was inclined to commit some kind of a crime, I would be more hesitant to do that, because then I'd be like, you know what, my friend Jim down the street that's a cop is going to have to arrest me, and how am I going to look him in the face and when I know how disappointed he's going to be.
Yeah. There's that other half of it too. Like, oh, damn it, now Jim's mad, and I did this. I mean, look, you don't want to get arrested. Don't do stupid shit. I mean, I feel like it's that easy, right? Like you think it'd be that easy. Evidently it's not. And another part of this, the riots too. Can you imagine? And it's mind blowing, but you're destroying your own community. Does that make sense? Yeah, we did it. Now we got to rebuild this place. Wait, what funding? Government
funding. To get a job anyway, but so let's burn down the businesses that actually provide the jobs.
It's crazy. And then they want the government to pay for it.
Yeah. Or the insurance. That's a great one. Say, well, insurance will rebuild it, so it's no big deal. I said, well, they might do it once.
Yeah, but after a while, they're like, all right, what is this? Like, is it Thursday? Are they burning it down again? No, it's not going to work that easy.
Right. And then they're done. They're gone. And it's amazing. There's a lot of businesses like up in Wisconsin. So after that, those riots that were happening, what's that kid's name that was?
The rifle.
Yeah.
I was still blown away by that. That still blows me away. It took me I still can't wrap my head around it. Like, well, one, two sides of the coin. He has to protect himself. Two, what the hell are you doing running around with an assault rifle? So
yeah,
I don't know. That's a tough one for me. I try to steer away from it because it blows me away.
Well, my understanding is his grandfather owned a gas station up there, and he was protecting his his grandfather's gas station. And these Antifa guys lit and again, this is my understanding of it. So these Antifa guys lit a garbage can, one of those big dumpsters, on fire and rolled it toward the gas station. And he used a fire extinguisher to put it out. And that's when the Antifa guys attacked him.
Yeah.
And then it escalated from there, and he ended up shooting 3 of them. So
yeah, and there's another case again. If you didn't back law enforcement in these weird corners, and you want to defund, like, this kid had to protect something, and he probably shouldn't have had to. Like, again, people.
Oh yeah.
Stop attacking law enforcement. These are examples, shining examples.
They had told the law enforcement to stand down, and I mean they called out the National Guard for when the jury or when the verdict was read.
Yeah.
Well, if they'd called the National Guard out in the first place, none of that would have happened.
Agreed. Yeah. A lot of rifles, a lot of hesitance,
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Like, again, I really hope moving forward, I can't stress this enough, community leaders get involved. It's the answer's not
and it has
less.
to be every kind of community, whether it's the religious community,
everything, or
the political community, or just the neighborhood. They all need to get involved. And whatever kind of organizations you belong to, I hope everybody starts to get to know the local law enforcement, the people that are around there, because they will find it. And some of them just don't want to do it, but I will guarantee you, they will find out that these are good guys.
Yeah.
And the men and women that put the uniform on, they don't do it because, like you said, they don't get paid enough to really do what they do. They do what they do because they want to serve. When I enlisted in the military, it was ridiculous how little I was paid. And I served for a number of years. I made it up to be an officer. Even as an officer, when I graduated college, and this is in the mid 90s, I made like $23,000 a year.
Oh my God.
As an officer. So imagine what a private makes. It's nothing.
These are people
why do they do it?
they're responsible for the protection of our company, our country. I mean,
right.
That being said too, real quick, so people understand about defund police, do you realize all this chaos being constructed on our enemies are in other countries laughing at this? They're having to them, this is the best possible scenario that we're imploding from the inside. This is what they want. And we're handing it to them on a platter. So, and then to hear that the pay of the military should increase too, because again, why it makes me think now, look what NBA players get paid. Look what baseball players get paid. And then think about how many NBA baseball players are over there fighting war or protecting our country or stopping killers. None of these guys are. The answer is none. So I think the answer, again, to reiterate, is increase police pay, increase the budget, give the proper training, give them incentives, right? And then have communities get involved. And for military, my goodness, those guys should be taken care of beyond all. They literally are going out there to sacrifice themselves so we could sit around with our phones and have negative banter on social media. Mind-blowing.
Yeah. Well, just before I forget, I'm headed to Pinellas County in just a few weeks, man. So
good.
Pinellas County, yeah, they're going to have an M-Vac here pretty soon. I'm pretty sure. So you, anybody in Pinellas County, boy, don't leave your DNA anywhere.
Yeah,
we'll get you
or get caught. Period. Well, Jared, I had a good time talking to you, man. Before we close out, though, I want you to promote your podcast.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's called All Things Crime, and it's on YouTube as well as all the Spotify and iHeartRadio and all of that. And I started All Things Crime because of COVID, basically, and so I started interviewing people that I knew in various positions in law enforcement, and because in the years that I've been doing M-Vac systems and helping law enforcement solve cases, I've in all of my discussions with people that are outside of law enforcement, there's so few that actually understand the real process. And so I started interviewing guys like Cloyd and homicide detectives that have years and years and the cases that they work. But I didn't necessarily want to delve into an actual case like what most true crime podcasts do. I wanted to get into the process so people understand what it really takes from start to finish, what it takes to solve a crime. And that's what all things crime is about.
I think that's a great idea. I'm going to tune in.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, I mean, that's some feedback and tell me what you think.
In a heartbeat, man. Well, in the meantime, we're definitely going to connect again because I have other things we're going to touch on, but we'll get to that in a later date.
Oh, anytime, man. I'd love it. Yeah, this has been fun.
Indeed, man. I thank you again, Jared. It's been a pleasure, friend.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. Hey, appreciate you having me on.
Indeed. Have a good night.